Hi, and welcome again to Off the Page. I'm Leslie Choice, and my guest today is Kevin Patterson. In 1994, he bought a boat out in BC, and he decided to sail it to Tahiti. He had a pretty interesting voyage, barely survived, I would say, but he wrote a book about it. He's here today to talk about it. Hi, Kevin.
Hi.
Good to have you here. I'm glad that you made it.
Thanks. Nice to be here.
How much did you know about sailing that day in 1994 when you bought your boat?
Not very much at all. It was really a pretty impetuous decision to go. I had grown up in Manitoba and had sailed little dinghies on sloughs and small lakes, but had never been to sea in anything other than a BC ferry at that time. So yeah, it was.
So there you were. Why Tahiti? I mean, this is not just sort of around the corner of the island or something like that in Vancouver Island. This is far, far away.
Yeah, it was sort of arbitrarily picked, but I think Tahiti's always had for me, and perhaps for a lot of people, a sense of mystique about it that has to do with its history and the writing about it by Robert Louis Stevenson and the Mutiny on the Bounty and things like that. I didn't know very much about it. It was, but yeah, I picked it mostly because it was a long ways away and seemed kind of exotic to me.
And it seemed like a great idea at the time.
Mm-hmm.
What kind of journey was this for you? What was it? Escape? Was it spiritual quest? Was it thrill-seeking or downright suicidal? How do you interpret it now, looking back?
I don't think it was suicidal. I think it was I was seeking escape, I guess. There's a long tradition in the Western world, and in particular in travel writing, of people heading out on the road seeking escape as a way of answering some problem or another and seeking some kind of redemption or insight into themselves or another. And risk is historically a part of that tradition, I think.
Yeah, you had been reading a lot of travel literature, I gather, from from reading through your book. When you use that word redemption, what does that mean for you? What are you referring to?
Well, I think that I'd been in the Army until just about a year before I went sailing, and I had found that quite a stifling way of living, which applies, broadly speaking, I think, to the lives that many people lead in little suburban bedroom communities, and we feel, or I felt, anesthetized and cut off from the usual threats and or what ought to be usual in terms of the feeling of accomplishment and purpose in the world. And so going traveling was a way of answering that craving, I think.
So this is going to take you out of that stifling life on the mainland and get you out there at sea, and exciting things are happening. In the big sense, did it work? Did it change you?
Sure it worked, yeah. I'm thankful every day that I went sailing, and look forward to getting out to sea just as soon as I can again. And it changed me, although in a way that made me maybe a little bit more suspicious of the idea of escape as an answer to anything.
Right. You did have a sailing companion, a guy named Don, and he knew a bit more about it than you did.
Yeah, he sailed south with me, although I came back part of the way with some friends, and then from Hawaii by myself. And Don was seeking the same sort of escape. And
okay, so take us out there. I want to be out on the boat with you, and I want to learn what you're learning. What did you learn about the wind itself?
The wind, well, on a sailboat at sea, the wind is the whole focus of your day in a way that it never is when you're living on shore. Certainly for me, it isn't. The wind living in a city is just sort of a nuisance that folds your umbrella inside out from time to time. But at sea, you learn quickly to be able to judge the strength of the wind to within a knot, just by how it feels on your cheek, and you develop a sense of, you become very attuned to to its strengths and its vagaries and its patterns in a way that's difficult to summarize.
And this is the Pacific Ocean. You're leaving from Victoria and headed out across a big expanse of water where there are no islands, there are no people except for folks that you might find on ships. Do you feel a great sense of being alone, aside from having one companion there on board?
Yeah, the sense of isolation and the sense that if you get into trouble, you're going to have to get out of it by yourself or not at all. That's very strong and very moving and, in a way, deeply satisfying, I thought.
What's it like at night on a really clear, star-filled night at sea?
It's just exquisite. On clear nights when you can see the stars and the satellites shooting overhead, it's especially in the south, when it's warm enough that you can lay there without being uncomfortable at all. It's just amazing. The boat seems to disappear beneath you. You can't really see it, and all you're aware of is this sky that's rocking back and forth. It's hard to see the ocean itself even.
I think you had an expression in your book there, something about the stars themselves would be bright enough that you could read by.
Or almost,
almost.
Yeah. That might be a little bit of hyperbole, if there was a full moon. A few times I tried it, but I would get headaches. But that's not so bad. I mean, you return to contemplating the skies, which are a lot more interesting.
Now, you use many excerpts from other travel writers that appear throughout your book. You were a great reader of travel writers. And I began to wonder, as I was reading your story, had this in some ways convoluted or warped your sense of the journey or enhanced it? Which way?
Both. What drew me to going traveling, I think, as a solution to a sense of dissatisfaction or search for something more important, was travel literature in the first place. When I was in the Army and very bored and unable to go traveling, I found myself reading an awful lot of travel literature, people like Bruce Chatwin and Wilfred Thesiger and Eric Newby. And each of these people presents, in almost all the books that I can think of off the top of my head, there's a sense of psychic unease that prompts the voyage. Moitessier speaks quite frankly of feeling like he loses his mind whenever he's stationary for more than a year or so. And so there's this tradition of going traveling, which is presented as an important solution to crummy communities and uninteresting lives. And that history is long and goes back, to the Middle Ages with the wandering Dominicans and Jesuits, I think, too. And I think it's not really a very helpful answer, actually.
What about this business of, when you go on a journey, in some ways you're searching for yourself, and you're looking for the change and all that sort of thing, but that old expression, wherever you go, there you are. It's still you in that situation. Does the journey shape your perceptions and change your personality, or are you forced to confront certain things that have always been there and may always will be? People are different when they're traveling than when they're at home, and that's why they go traveling. But the important lesson that's usually brought home to them is exactly as you've stated, that the problems in the interior landscape remain with you. And in this way, travel writing, in the same way that science fiction, which may be set in the future, is always about the present, in the same way I think travel writing is always about home. And very often our dissatisfactions with home in contrast with the places that are traveled to against home. So you become this link in the chain of travel writers. You've read these other travel writers, Joshua Slocum and other people sailing across the seas alone, and they write the book about it. You're somewhat influenced. Now you've written a book. Other people will read it and say, yeah, this sounds like something that I should do, and set off across the seas. Do you feel any kind of moral responsibility about that?
Well, I think in my book, especially in the last quarter of it, I really call into question this whole tradition and this whole presentation of flight as a solution to the problem of limited communities and the weakened imagination that you have in little suburban dull towns. I don't think that is much of a solution at all. I think the problem of unappealing lives back home is to fix those unappealing lives rather than going out on the road.
Speaking of communities, the first community that you stop in once you leave the west coast of Canada, you end up in Hawaii, on Oahu, Honolulu, Waikiki. I've been there. It feels like a pretty strange kind of a community. It's not exactly South Sea nirvana.
No, we had a sense of otherworldliness there. We had been at sea for 35 days at that point, and spent the whole time in completely ridiculous fantasies about South Pacific ideals. And we hadn't intended actually to go to Hawaii. We had been heading directly for the Marquesas in French Polynesia, and had some gear failures on the way. And so we put into Hawaii to replace the broken gear. And so it was there's a sense of cognitive dissonance. We were already living in a world that was very, very different from Oahu and McHappy Burger meals and that sort of thing.
What were the problems on the way over from BC to there?
They were boiled down to my own incompetence and my education about sail handling in storms, and we had ripped some sails and broken a few pieces of gear.
What about at night? Somebody's got to be sailing this boat at night, right? Somebody has to be conscious the whole time, but not the whole time.
Well, single-handers, and on the way back I single-handed, clearly aren't able to be on lookout all the time. It's a problem. It's a risk you end up taking. The best solution for a single-handed or short-handed crew is to try and stay awake as much as possible at night and sleep during the day, the assumption being that freighters will be able to see you and keep out of your way during the day, and they'd be less able to do that at night. In the South Pacific, you'll go weeks and weeks without seeing another ship, even on the horizon, and so it doesn't feel like much of a risk to fall asleep at night. When you start to approach the Strait of Juan de Fuca, or when you're on the line between Long Beach and Yokohama on the Pacific, it really does feel like a risk because boats go by pretty regularly. Yeah, and I think
much bigger than you are, these ships. Of course,
yeah, they would hit you and never even notice. I think. There's tales told, and I think they are true, of freighters coming into port with bits of rigging stuck on their bow or on their anchors, and never really knowing what happened or where, and the crew quickly kind of scraping them off and painting over the scratch. But I think the person that's going to keep you out of a collision is yourself with respect to the freighters. And if you're asleep, how are you going to do that? Which is a difficult
there's
question.
a worry.
Yeah.
I would certainly be worrying about it. As you're moving southward across the Pacific, do you notice the water itself change?
Yeah, it's exquisite. The first thing that happens after you go off the continental shelf is there's sort of a rich green, brown, muddy color to the water, and that changes fairly abruptly, just over the space of a few miles, to a deeper aquamarine blue. And then as you get further south, the water becomes a lighter and lighter blue. It's really a beautiful thing to watch change. I think it's because the water gets warmer, and as the water gets warmer, there's less oxygen in it, and hence less organic life.
And there you are, headed toward that idyllic place in the South Pacific. My guest today is Kevin Patterson. We're talking about his book, The Water in Between, and his voyage to Tahiti. But right now we're going to take a short break, and we'll be back right after this. Welcome back to Off the Page. My guest today is Kevin Patterson. We're talking about his voyage in the South Pacific, and we've left Hawaii. We've left the decadence of Waikiki behind, and you're headed to someplace called Palmyra Island. What's it like there?
Palmyra is maybe the strangest place on Earth. It's a little atoll about about 2 miles across with a large lagoon in the center that has been historically uninhabited. During the Second World War, the American Navy built an installation there that housed 6,000 men, I think, at one point. And then after the war, they abandoned this installation, and so now there are the ruins of an airstrip and a whole little city with what was once a gymnasium and once a hospital and once a cafeteria.
Did you love it there? Was this that nirvana you'd been searching for?
It felt kind of post-apocalyptic, actually. It was disturbing to walk around it. There was, to the extent that it's known because of some murders that took place there in the 70s between boaters. One couple was killed by another couple and their boat was stolen, and a book was written about it. So there's so when one arrives there, it's usually with knowledge of those murders as sort of being the thing first on your mind, and so there's a sense of ghostliness about the city just from its history.
But your next destination was somewhat different, Penryn Atoll. Although I noticed you were searched right away, weren't you, when you arrived there?
Yeah, just routine customs stuff. The Penryn Atoll is one of the northern Cook Islands, and is really, really beautiful. Physically, not all that different from Palmyra, but it has been inhabited by Polynesian people for 800 years or so. And there's an altogether different sense of peace about the place. There's groundwater, which is why I think it's inhabited, and the presence of humanity there is what lends it a sense of vitality and warmth and welcome, and maybe that was the first thing that observation was the first thing that put the lie to this idea of withdrawal from humanity as being some kind of solution to trouble.
You do get to Tahiti, but then you do this strange thing. You fly back to Canada, to the Arctic, to work.
Yeah.
Why?
Well, the voyage was never really about getting to Tahiti. It was about, or rather, it was about getting to Tahiti, but it wasn't about arriving at Tahiti. And I was becoming kind of agitated. I'd been on this boat for 6 months by that point, or almost 6 months, and I was running low on money too, so I need to get back and get some work.
Some cash, but all the way to the north, that would have to be an environmental contrast.
Yeah, I had worked up in the Arctic before and had friends there, and it was easy to find work up there, and also I was drawn to the same things about the Arctic. The Arctic is broadly comparable to the South Pacific. You know, there's these little outposts of communities that are widely separated, of maritime people, the Inuit, just like the Polynesians, that are largely self-sufficient, which is a little anachronistic these days. The Inuit still live largely on seal and caribou, and the Polynesians still largely fish. It's a more similar place than you would think on first assessment.
Then you go back to the South Pacific and you do some more sailing. And in this whole big journey, of course, you do find your way back to Canada by way of the water. But did you ever think you were going to die at any given time?
Well, on the face of it, sailing out on the ocean in little boats sounds dangerous, and it probably sounds more dangerous than it really is. Lots of boats go offshore every year, and it's pretty unusual for any of them to get into trouble. When they do, of course, they're widely publicized. So I guess what I'm saying is that objectively, sitting back now, I probably wasn't in all that much danger, although I was in some storms coming home that felt to me dangerous at the time.
That was the roughest part on you, too, wasn't it?
Yeah. The single-handed part of the voyage from Hawaii home was 31 days, which is a long time to go without talking.
How much sleep did you get that time?
I started off all ambitious about never sleeping for more than 15 or 20 minutes at a time at night, and then catnapping during the day. And I have to admit that after I'd been out there for a couple of weeks, I was falling asleep in the cockpit and waking up hours later and looking around and being pretty pleased I hadn't been hit by a freighter. But
yeah, good luck there for you. You write in your book, you say, I slowly began to fall to pieces. This is on your trip home. Did you ever begin to doubt yourself, doubt your mental acuity to continue with the trip?
Well, I found it profoundly disorienting and confusing to be without a conversation companion for that long a period of time. I found that
You
very
must
strange.
have talked out loud.
Yeah, I think everybody does. Yeah, that got out of hand after a while, actually.
Long conversations with yourself, that sort of thing, or to seagulls sitting.
Yeah, started to alarm myself.
When you arrived back on land, I think you noted that you're sort of like the scuzziest guy in town or something.
Yeah. In a town full of loggers and people who had just spent a week on the West Coast Trail, that was an accomplishment.
And you're a physician, of course, and I can't help but wonder about this business of the redemption and the healing. Did the physician heal himself on this journey?
I didn't. I don't know. I don't. While I was out sailing, I was thinking. I didn't conceive of myself as a doctor, in an important way. I was a wanderer like everyone else out there who had a job and did a certain thing for a living like everyone else out there. I don't know that my experience as a sailor was that much colored by my experience as a physician, except I knew how to treat seasickness.
Yes, which I'm sure would help along the way. We're going to take one final short break, and we'll be back right after this. You've been watching Off the Page today. My guest has been Kevin Patterson. After such a long journey from Vancouver Island to Tahiti and back, part of the way back single-handed, what do you do then?
I rested for a little while, and then I went back up to the Arctic and worked there, and I had always done some writing and spent that winter doing more writing. One way or another, I ended up living on my boat on Salt Spring Island up until about a year and a half ago, when I moved out here to Halifax to do an internal medicine residency.
And at least you're still close to the ocean. Do you still read other travel writers and more travel literature?
Yeah, I'm pretty much addicted to it. I find those stories very, very compelling, although I don't think of it as being, I don't think of travel as being innately redemptive anymore.
For some of us, we're happy to sit at home and read your story there without having to suffer all the grief and then confront all the pitfalls along the way. Bruce Chatwin was one of your favorite writers, I gather.
Yeah, I think I admire him as a writer, certainly. The book, in large part, is a running argument with him, though. He proposes that people are more evolved as nomads, and man is truest to his or herself, wandering and without possessions. And that's a persuasive argument, certainly as he presents it, but then he presents himself as being a kind of a nomad and able to find redemption out on the road, wandering.
And you discovered that you were not. You're back here in civilization. Kevin, thank you very much for joining us on the show today. And thanks for watching Off the Page. I'll see you again next time.